Thank you so much for your very warm and generous words of welcome. And it's a privilege actually to be in this conversation with Veer, who I of course call Veerju. Uh, it's a friendship that goes back several decades. We've collaborated on various projects, and and this is really built on a shared preoccupation with Kashmir, as he likes to joke, but only half in jest. My people left Kashmir many centuries ago. His people left about 30 years ago. And either way, that sense of what it means to live in the diaspora, what it means to work from an exilic consciousness, has been very strongly present to both of us. Veer, in his magnificent career as a visual artist, in my work as a poet and translator. And I want to actually lead off by maybe reciting a brief verse from, not from me, but from a great poet called Dinanath Kaur Nadim. It's a verse that I find myself circling back to quite often. It goes like this. Bugyavna az, tikazi az ti jangbaz, tikazi az ti jalsaz, hol gandit kashirim, yani zaget, bugyavna az. I will not sing today, because today warlords and conspirators have held my Kashmir in thrall. Today I will not sing today. And the trouble is that that has been pretty much the history of Kashmir for many centuries, but with a very particular emphasis on events of the late 1980s and 1990s, which acted as a crucible for Veer, for your journey in many ways. So painful as this memory of Exodus Day, 19th January is, could I invite you to think back to that moment when you had to ask very sharp questions to yourself about what does it mean to belong, where does one belong, and how does one do that?
Thank you. Thank you, JLF, for inviting me here. Thank you, Ojas, to display wonderful works and got me here. And Ranjit, whom I have associated, as he put it, for many decades with various projects on this subject itself. That was Kashmir, which connects both of us. So going back to 90, you are making me to travel back in 90, that's 34 years back now, when I left Kashmir because of obvious reasons. So it was very traumatic because there was no communication basically. There was no social media, there was no mobile, there was no connect with the rest of the country in that sense. So I moved along with the whole community moved, and also who were engaged with politically or who marginalized the so-called freedom movement in Kashmir had to move out and had to suffer in various ways. The people who left or the people who were there faced this trauma. So everyone has a story. You may be an artist, you may be a clerk, you may be a professor, you may be a businessman. Everyone had a story. So I have my story too. So it was a very struggling time to exist because I came to Delhi. It's a bigger state where you have to exist, you have to survive, you have to face many friends. So to begin with, I engaged with some kind of activism with some of my writer friends. We tried to tell the story, reach to the people, go state to state, try to tell the story so that this would be stopped, which didn't happen. So it continued till date. The conflict in Kashmir became deeper and deeper. So we were too small to stop it. So that a year and a half, I was very totally in that activism. Then I started my journey through the language of painting, which also 90 was very crucial for me because it also changed perception of life uh, differently. So the language of art also, what I learned in Baroda was not helping me out now with this kind of experience, moving out, being in exile. So I was struggling to paint, so I started painting in Gadi studios to begin with, and it was Bawalpur House where I landed, where every artist lands there, and it's 5 rupees ki cart, and you find food somewhere around. So it was more of a survival than becoming an artist or practice my art. So that was the period tough, and I started working on it.
Also, wading out into waters that have not been easy for either of us in this situation, you also found yourself in a precarious place politically. Because on the one hand, all our friends on the left liberal side of the spectrum they had a very particular view of what was happening in Kashmir. Yeah. So the
Yeah.
first way in which you were looked at was with a certain degree of suspicion, I think. And on the other hand, you have very powerful majoritarian forces that want to weaponize this crisis. But you've gone through this minefield in a very dignified and elegant way, maintaining a sense of the larger picture, which is what has been lost. What has been lost is the syncretism that brought communities together, forms of communion, forms of literature. When I think of Lal Ded, for instance, whose work I've translated, when you look at that corpus of sacred poetry, you find that it is at the intersection of the Shaiva and the Sufi worlds. It marks what Kashmir can be at its best, which is the spirit of convergence. So, could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be in Delhi, particularly, having to somehow be an ambassador of this situation in a way, and fending off all of these different claims on your time and on your being? I'm thinking particularly of your early work with Zahmat, if you want to anchor it to that.
Uh, as I said, I was activist for a while, and I tried to convince what is happening, and which didn't work. The politically didn't work. I think there were various governments coming into the form, and I don't think any government, whether it was left, right, or center, had really focused on the problem, which was huge. So I confined myself through my work, and I started painting. That also was therapeutic for me at that moment. So I go back to those works. So there's a quote.
Saeed.
Edward says, "Exile is strangely compelling to think about, but terrible to experience. It's unhealable rift between human being and native place, between the self and its true home. Its essential sadness can never be surmounted." This quote taught me something. I started a journey of painting, and so this was my first work I did. Terrorist on floating land. I thought I used floating as metaphorically because it's a land of saints and Sufis and rishis, and it's like so it will not exist for long. So this was a long piece of work, which was not my language. The earlier I used to paint, what I learned from Baroda, this is what was changing in me, and it turned to be therapeutic for me. I wasn't going to be artist, but I was just trying to document certain events of that time. So that was the period I was painting these kind of works. What does it move? I was mostly painting what I experienced that time, and my work became personal, political. So these were pundits going into registration of being refugees in Jammu, and this was Laskol, who was martyred, or Maulana, who was martyred that time. So likewise, I would paint. just as a, but today I feel it is a good archival material of that time because things kept moving. So this happened at these kind of works I painted in 90s to 90, I think 92 I did the first show at Art Heritage by Mr. Al-Kazi. He recognized it and shown me there. That's where I began as an art practice very differently. And that's how I started painting these. These are some of the works of that period.
I know. Remember these very well indeed from earlier conversations and also the book that Nancy and I did with you in the dialogue series. Yeah. But it also strikes me that you didn't find yourself trapped in some sense of the exceptionalism of your situation. Severe and demanding and traumatic as it was, you've also found yourself over the years reaching out with empathy to other kinds of situations which are similar. Thinking particularly here of Gaza, which is a nightmare we're all living through. So do you want to talk a little about the role of travel, particularly in your work? Not travel as leisure, but travel as also seeking affinities with other situations that resonate for you?
Yeah, I didn't feel bitter at the same point because I learned so much out of it. And I was looking now in a larger world, how it's engaged with these conflict and displacement and migrations. So maybe Gaza or the Ukraine this time and so many things. So I think I engaged with other things and that became also important. I became part of Sahmat was doing so many things that time. So I became part of it and to engage with them in that sense. So I think it was very learning for me and engaging and analyzing the situation at various places. So I became now the outsider insider to Kashmir problem as well as the other problems happening in country itself. There was that time many things were happening. Babri Masjid was demolished. There were so many movements. So we got engaged with that kind of activism culturally. What we could do as an intellectual property, how you can build and deal with these things situations.
But there was also, you've described yourself as having this slightly paradoxical insider-outsider situation as far as Kashmir was concerned. But you never stopped going back, even in the worst periods. And out of that came what began as a private record, which was the photographs you were taking. Yeah. And that eventually developed into this series that we worked on together, Pandit Houses. So could you talk about this as in some sense, a kind of
after many years, after a few years of painting my memories and whatever my experiences were, I thought at one point a studio practice is not enough to speak about certain things. So I visited my homeland after many, many years. And I visited my home basically, which I knew is not there, which was burnt a few years back. But facing it physically was something very traumatic in the sense, as you said, when the root is cut, fruit is rotten. I felt a rotten piece there. So I started engaging with houses which were familiar to me. I first thought I will paint them, but uh, it looked our emotionalities. So I took a photograph, camera as a medium. So I started documenting the houses which were I familiar, my cousins and others. Then I kept going. I know you have engaged and you have shown it many times. You have curated this Pandit House series, which is the houses, abandoned houses which we left behind. It's also, there are so many aspects of how the civilizational loss was there, and this vernacular architecture which is so huge, which is decaying. And I did try to tell government to save some of them or to do something which didn't happen. So this ongoing house project is still ongoing actually, the archival project. I think you did show it in Bombay or Delhi or Adelaide somewhere.
All of those three places.
Yeah. So this was very, very important project. It still is for me. I still keep finding the houses in far-flung areas. There's a place called Hall where hundreds huge structure houses are still there, half decade, and it definitely evokes and interests me all the time. When I go, I keep finding them and documenting them and archiving them.
Because I sometimes think that a body of work like this comes to us like news from another planet. And this goes for everything else that happens in Kashmir. There's a way in which you hear certain aspects of the news, but the cultural work that's going on there, I don't know how many people know of the work in heritage conservation that Salim Beg of Intak has been doing, or Hakim Samir Hamdani, Kamus Bukhari. All of these people have been active. It's as if there's no news of any of these more redemptive and regenerative aspects of the situation that seems to filter out. So I would, in at least from one point of view, contextualize the Pandit houses in this scenario of how to preserve the memory of, the lived experience of what is one of South Asia's most beautiful medieval cities too. People tend not to know that there's a great deal of traditional wooden architecture in Srinagar, for instance. So building off of that, and to jump our sequence a little, Veer, do you want to talk a little bit about the more recent work that you've been doing, the return that takes the form of a collaboration with, very particularly with this community of papier-mâché artists?
Yeah, I start going back and forth to Kashmir and engage with the people. That's what I felt that I should engage with the people, artists, writers, poets. I did start doing certain activism there, and one of them was a very moving experience that which we did in an abandoned silk factory, Jim Risham Khana, that I brought all the artists who have left Kashmir and the artists who were left behind. So we did a collaborative project together. This is where my engagement with other artists and started, which I called concourse, which was very, very important. And then so many things happened during the course, because when I was installing that Sujat Bukhari was killed on the same day, who was to meet me that evening. So that's a situation where you work in and you engage with that kind of conflict. But that was a day, very bad day, and kind of. I want to move this ahead. So then there was we were engaged to save these civilizational houses. There are these heritage houses, but there was a massive flood after that, uh, and I felt very sad of it because many of these houses got washed away, which we would have thought of being a very archival and preserve them. So I made, it was a period I wanted to go, I couldn't go, so I was painting so many faces, so many memories, the people whom I know, whom I got engaged recently, whether it was a shopkeeper or a professor. So I painted these faces and painted hundreds of them till the communication got restored and went back. So during that process, when I was doing this concourse and engagement with people, there was the Kochi project happened, outcome of that.
With the Kochi Muzris Biennale.
Muzris Biennale. And in that, or I was looking for some material which is popular, which will connect where the story is from. So I got this papier-mâché, which you usually see in props, you see in this souvenir pieces in basket. That's where I engaged with papier-mâché and to begin with. So this is again then I've done this Fallen House, which was a large installation at India Art Fair to preserve the heritage of that time.
It's also some of these forms, they seem to be doubled in a way. They refer to the spiritual interiority of the ziyarats, for instance, but also the armored shell of a highly militarized state. So how has it been like to explore institutional possibilities? You were involved with the Resham Khana project. You've at various points thought of a Srinagar Biennale. Could you talk a little bit before we circle back to the current work? Do you want to? I'm also saying this because you and I were just at an extremely inspiring session featuring the music producer Joe Boyd. And he was talking about, he presented music that was produced, beautiful, heartbreaking music that was produced during the worst years of the apartheid regime in South Africa. So there's a sense that from the ground of trauma and lack and suffering, you can yet produce memorably beautiful art. So this is not an argument to say that one must constantly suffer to produce art, but it's just something that one could keep in mind. So, I mean, I find that combination of experiences very, very moving. So do you want to think through or tell us what you have in mind going further in terms of rebuilding cultural institutions in Kashmir?
It's always important. That's why I did some of the projects, whether it's a Kochi or the concourse there. It's always good to, because politically we have seen the debates, it remains in a debate, and everyone has, their agendas to deal with these projects. But culturally you can get engaged, because culturally you lose a lot. Culturally you are uprooted, and your language, your moorings, your everything. So to get back, you have to engage and do these projects, and I think that is the real healing. And I have been engaged in such sense that you can do. It's not like otherwise you feel like you're a reporter of the situation, unless you're not engaged with it. So that was my main thing, that you have to be there to understand it more, understand the other dimensions of it. What happens to the community who's there? What happens to the community who are left? How do you bring them back? That's why I did one, two, three projects where I brought the people in who were reluctant to come, but once they come, they really feel something different. So it becomes very easier to you get certain solutions right. Nothing is easy, but it becomes easier than political dialogues. Culturally, it becomes very engaged because the language, the food, which is commonality between the communities who have been polarized or separated because of the obvious reasons. So I think these areas are very important. Yeah.
I had a really nice and illuminating conversation yesterday with M.K. Raina, the theater person and theater activist. He was talking about how he took a group of young Kashmiri Pandit, young people who've grown up in refugee camps in India and have never been to Kashmir. And again, he reported the same kind of sense of fear and reluctance, but on going back, how they were able to pick up, or the old neighbors and friends were able to pick up the threads of conversation and connection. And that's how one rebuilds this broken region in a way. But could I ask you now to take us into your current body of work, which is both deeply melancholy, but also in some strange way full of hope, which is absolutely currently on show, actually, in New York?
Yeah, at some point you try to think as an artist that what is your role? Yesterday there was somebody asking question to you somewhere, what is the artist? Will he be able to do something for the situations? But I was thinking, yes, it becomes a reference point where you engage with certain things. But again, I said, you can't take it beyond that. What is your contribution in such situation? Can you act as a healer? Can you push your boundaries rather than only documenting the situations? You can document the situation, which is very important, which becomes archival and which becomes a reference point for somebody who wants to engage, because you need to have these reference points. So artists is one way, there are the writers, they are doing the theater people doing, we are some of the, like MK is doing a lot in the band, with the band Perther and its theater movement there. So I'm engaged with this visual art scene. So I think these are very, very important. So at one point, then I thought, while I was dealing, as I said, with the papier-mâché, for some reason I wanted to build a language which will connect my subject without saying it is Kashmir, but you will find this is Kashmir because of this papier-mâché motifs. So while I was engaged with these craftsmen, I've heard their story too, which is also a community which are minority Shia community who is engaged with this uh, papier-mâché craft, which came from Iran. So I was very amused, and then I was also seeing decay of it. That their children doesn't do, they don't practice because of socially they're a respectable profession they find in it, or there's no economic, balance in it. So it was like quite very dangerous kind of situation. But while as then I thought, why not to take it up and use it as because it's so beautiful. I would say if you Kashmir is very strange. You shut your eyes, think of Kashmir. It's so beautiful. Then you go closer to it. It's traumatic. There's a conflict. There are layers and layers and layers you are engaging with. So I thought using it, uh, this medium, Kar-i-kalamkari, this papier-mâché craft, which we see from dargahs and old houses, and also in these souvenirs. So I got these things to heal the wounds, which is evolved from my shrapnel series, which I have been doing many years, which also came from my experience when I was visiting Kashmir, and I got caught up between stone pelting and security forces. I had to run away through the gullies, which I am very familiar with, and 100 boys got killed that day, and this whole landscape you saw changing, like there was debris around, and that stuck in my mind for long. And I started painting, drawing them into these shrapnel pieces, these automobile pieces all around. I built chambers, which you were engaged and curated one of these, where you enter into the chamber, see these devastated pieces, these mechanical automobiles, pieces scattered all around. Those were the drawings, and those drawings only I moved ahead, cut them in the wood, and I thought these debris, these shrapnel pieces need to be healed with this beautiful craft which comes from papier-mâché tradition. So I'm layering these two together to make what I call healing wounds, and I thought this is the road I should take, and also engage with craft, save the craft tradition for future decay. So these are two, three things together which turned into sometimes into fractured carpets. And there are stories which we are losing. The stories I have heard, the story I have experienced, the ritualistic traditions, or even the all kind of things I started putting into the practice of this healing wounds series, which is on in New York now.
Yeah. There's another strand because everything you do has a forward looking artistic impetus, but there's also a great commitment to bringing back things that were lost from the past. Because if you look into this, there's also citations from your own work, but there are also quotations from what very few people seem to be aware of, which is the Kashmir School of Miniature Painting.
Yeah.
Because normally the whole account of Indian, in the first place, the word miniatures is a little off because they aren't really miniatures. But our understanding of Indian miniatures tends to be premised on Mughal, Rajput, Dakhani, by and large. So we all know about the Pahari schools, right? Guler, Basholi, Mankot, and so on. But this has somehow gone under the radar, and many of those works also were lost during the floods when the basement of SPS Museum got flooded. But tell us about your relationship to that part of your heritage as an artist and as an archivist.
Uh, uh, that stuck me recently when I went to Shri Pratap Museum. I wanted to look for those images which I have been seeing when I was a student, which was not there. Either they are packed or either they have got spoiled in the massive flood which really damaged most part of this museum, and where we lost a lot of manuscripts and very antiquities and a lot of things which were perishable. And maybe this, so I then looked for the references which I used in my work and to preserve some part of it my way into these, while healing the wounds. It's another layer because I was archiving these ritualistic images and other things. So it's iconography of that kind. So as much I could, so you would see these references in these works also.
Maybe a couple of questions before we open this up to all of our friends and colleagues here. Because this relationship between the arts and the crafts is a tense and complex one in India. And we know who the exemplars are, J. Swaminathan, K.G. Subramanian. Each of these artists enacted a particular kind of relationship to the world of the so-called traditional crafts or folk arts or tribal arts, all terms that are contested. But I've often wondered in that context, there's a great source of inspiration for the contemporary artist in these worlds. But does it work the other way as well, particularly in the relationship that you've developed with these artists, the papier-mâché artists in Srinagar? Do you want to take us into that part of the dialogue? Has there been on their part to kind of reaching out to your world and your perspectives and your way of making art?
Yes and no, because this present generation who is traditionally engaged are not moving much other than what they are doing. But it only inspires them, their children, who go to fine arts and engage both ways. The next generation, it would definitely, I feel, add a dimension. Though I am really working hard on it with the craftsmen or the master craftsmen. And, see, one of my craftsmen, Arshad, who has chosen to be a laborer because there's no wages for it. So the children don't take it up. So it is like if you now show them how it works in a contemporary practice and make it happen, so it might move a bit. That's what I feel. Because I have one has become a shopkeeper, so we got him back to work on it. And now they are seeing some economy in the place which comes from the contemporary practice. And in fact, one of them is building now a house. So it is like I see it from that point of view. I don't see it from whether craft, art, what works within each other. But I see if we can save this tradition and this next generation gets engaged much because they also get educated. And so they can go in a better way and deal with it, either contemporary way or traditional or the mix the two and make it happen, which is very important for us as a country because this is our strength. The craft, the textile and all like we don't have to look like Matis and Picassos as happened for long in our country. So let's have our position in place, which is so important and which we are proud of all the time, but we need to take it forward into the global way.
A couple more questions. I keep saying that and I keep going on, but your turn will come, I can assure you of that. One last question, which is in this recent work, you've always had this deep sensitivity to architecture. So could you talk about these forms of the ziyarat that are, or you could even, I don't know if you have images of the current exhibition. What's it like to create a shrine space in a white cube, in a gallery space? What is the kind of invitation that then gets made to visitors?
If I say the conflict of Kashmir is about not Hindu versus Muslim, it's more about the Sufi tradition, to wipe out Rashid tradition. So this is the tradition which we have been seeing, which is very strong in Kashmir. Rest becomes like facade, like you might do many raqs around it, but this is what, because many shrines have been burnt, Chari Sharif, Dasgir Sahab, so all have been burnt for the reason that radicalism doesn't agree with these kind of practices. So as we know, as kids, we'll be always taken to these dargahs. We were going to dargah. I still go to dargah. This is the first thing I go to Kashmir, I go to dargah. Kashmir, I keep going. Whenever I always say, whenever I lose oxygen in my studio, I go to Kashmir and I go first go to Dargah. And Dargah is a place where you have a dialogue. If you really see how it happens, it's really charging. How women aspect, it's a very liberal space. It's not like Janana Mardana. It's a liberal space. So that and its heritage, its architecture, its vulnerability of many kinds have stuck me for a long time when I was doing house project. And so I brought this into my practice, and also it's a silent place, it's a resting place. I call Kayamga with the recent work I'm putting in New York. Kayamga is like where you do Kayam, where you do rest. And this is the resting place because it has been for all the communities. So I love this engagement, this lattice work, and I start experimenting and getting it from different shrines and putting it to White Cube Gallery, and have this also caskets, coffins inside it, which also evoke what happens in conflict and also give the tribute like that. Similar way for the poets, I have this one of the very important one installation there, where poets I have connected from the 14th century to present, Lal to Aga Shahid Ali Khan, and Mantu to Nadim, and Mahjur to, I have been showing them, and because these traditions who have spoken about the conflict, Kashmiriyat and other stuff, and been recited over the generations, been sung by various singers, and this time also I have many singers who have sung, you have spoken about Aga Shahid Ali, which is still a part of which you showed in Serendipity, which you curated, that showed. It's wonderful. That gave me very good insight to move further in that direction where the poets are part of my work. Thank you.
Okay. Udit, is there a mic that can travel?
Question to you.
Enhanced by the photographs and paintings. My question to Ranjit is, because the only thing better than reading a book is hearing you speak. So my question is, while exile is also a form of deep personal loss, so also is fructification of a dream turned sour. For example, a freedom fighter in India who worked for the freedom for India and sacrificed his life, and seeing what is happening now would be, it's totally antithetical to what he fought for. So could you put in, or attempt to put in words, what would be that sense of loss? Thank you.
Well, very briefly, because it's really Veer's day. I think I would actually focus on projects. Project sounds very instrumental. This is really a life commitment to overcoming that, to bearing witness to that sense of loss in the first place, and to flowering despite it. There's a German word that I hold on to, and I've always held on to since I was a child. It's trotzdem. It's regardless, in spite of. And I think that in some profound way defines who we can be at our very best, no matter what turbulence comes our way. So that's how I might parse your question. But thank you for the question. And there was an arm raised there. Yeah.
Is there, you talked about Kashmir. So is there any remote possibility that the Kashmiri Pandits may get resettled in the Kashmir Valley?
Yeah, that's what we are looking for. We have been looking for 35 years. So there have been promises and other stuff, but it doesn't happen as of now. It is not there. So we don't know what lies in future.
Mani, did you have a question?
Your art is for healing. We did see your piece, and it's very beautiful for us. But how was the journey for you? How the art healed you? Have you been healed? And how far you think like your journey will go on until you feel that, yes, you've got the sakoon?
As I said, when I did my first work, it was very therapeutic for me. So So that's why I took this route of political works and I started doing it. I could do better, I could do different, because I had to struggle to deal with the political works, because we don't have audience for political work so much as West has. So I struggled, but they became my compulsion. I could have taken an easier route, but it was somewhat being therapeutic to me, so I continued with it. But I'm a very restless soul. Ever since I left, I feel I have never laced my shoes. I'm walking all the time, so I have not rested. If I dream my ancestor house, not the house I made in Gurgaon. So that is the situation I am in, and that remains. I think it remains. I always feel that's why I say I'm insider and outsider. I keep going. I'm one of few lucky or unlucky. I keep going and engaging, going Kashmir back for my oxygen. Even if I have to go for a day, I go not by the scenic, but talking to people, going to downtown, go to these dargahs. I feel nice, and that gives me energy. Every time I go, I come with something to deal with through different mediums and materials, because every medium has possibility and limitation. Sometimes photography works, videos works, art, painting, sculpture. That's my life.
One last question here now.
Okay. So there's a very profound sense of loss and grief in your work. What I wanted to ask was, are there any specific objects, like seemingly insignificant objects, such as a bus ticket, and like insignificant, like a comb or a bag? Are there any objects that have stayed with you? I wanted to ask that.
Lots, like the house itself stayed with me. This architectural, I will say, these porches, which we'll call dub, where we would often meet for morning kahwa tea with the family. It always hits you hard. So it's not there. So that's what. And I bring that into my work. See, I address everything which is lost into my work, whether it's those ritualistic practices, whether it is going to certain places, certain dargahs, certain temples, to certain, these that's what I'm dealing with actually. I'm also releasing myself at the same time, archiving the material. Maybe it becomes a reference point somewhere.
Thank you very much, Virju, for sharing your practice and your life. And thank you all for your attention.
I see by loss and exile. And you are dealing with that, attempting to heal yourself through it, bearing witness, etc. I just wonder, has it crossed your mind, or have you ever thought about what it would be like to sort of move beyond these themes and work with something else, the road not taken? Would that be a final step of healing if you did not have to talk about loss? What would be the possibilities there?
I have dealt some different kind of works in between, which was very successful, was that Zodiac series. I did artists I have loved, read, inspired, and I have done a large body of work. But at the end, I felt I am committed to do what it comes finally. You do what your experiences are. I might be I'm very technically or skillful to do anything. I can paint this or that or this, but that doesn't make your journey what you belong to. That's why it's very important to do what you feel and what you experience. And it's not that I'm putting forcibly in it. It's like it's happening through me, so I have to do it. So it is not like, it's not your compulsion to do something which is tragic, or there should be tragedy, then only you should paint and do. It's not a compulsion. It is just very happens. So you take it up, and you feel that you can express this that way. And your migration and displacement stays with you because I see through the eyes of my mother, who is 95 today, every day. So it has not gone out of me. There's a reminder around, and there's no settlement back. It's not finally economy and how good you are settled. It's something else about the root, which gets cut, so you feel longing to it. You don't come out of it.